I think there's no doubt about this because the edit we're about to produce just doesn't work. It involves Mark and Philip and all they've got to do is sit on a sofa. But for whatever reason, Philip doesn't sit. I can't remember what caused us to do this, but there we are. This is what is given to the edit suite and we're going to have to try to solve it. Visually we can't. This exercise is all about the fact that if you can lay a sound effect across the whole thing, you never know. The vision joins a little bit better. Well, that's up to you to decide. Let's have a look at the shots. Here we have our two guys about to sit.
I ought to have shares in silver or duraclid.
Funny thing about funerals. I'm cut.
You notice Philip sits very late because he's picking up the blooming script from the sofa. And here's the shot that follows and the shot that's supposed to join.
It's a funny thing about funerals. The deceased have no influence whatsoever in the events, even though they're the reason for the gathering.
Let's see if we can put them together. Okay, let's lay down all of the wide shot and onto the timeline it goes. Because our character here, Mark, is the only one who does sit, I'm going to go with his sit. The good thing about this is at least Philip, this is the guy on the left, is actually moving forward. So let's choose there the point to go and pick up our other shot. And again choose the best point. At that point they're both moving downwards. Sorry, it looks a little bit ridiculous. But let's just try it from there and take the rest of the speech and put that onto the timeline. Now, this ain't going to look pretty, but here it goes.
Silver or duraclid.
It's a funny thing about funerals.
Well, you're very welcome to push this around any way you like to try to get the vision to work better. Mark's sit is quite good, but we must get rid of that sound, and I'm going to lift out the offending bit of sound.
It's a funny thing about funerals.
And we're into the same business of finding a bit of sound to fill the gap. To help us, I've given you some sitting effects from another shot. So I'm going to put these on another track. So let's time it to about there. And then bring it all back so that it covers our lack of atmos here. Does that help?
Duraclid.
It's a funny thing about funerals.
Yeah, it's happening a little bit early, but it does help. Try it again. What we might do is just put a mix on that just so that we don't hear the sound disappear. Let's say 6 frames and add it. And again, let's do another one there. Try it again. I think we've got the sound roughly right. Now I'm going to tighten this incoming. Still not happy with it. So I've got a very peculiar trim here. I'm cutting out a bit of the black hole, less of the incoming. I'm too aware that my eye's not being taken across to Mark quickly enough. So I'm just going to knock that a few frames down, get his position about there. Let's try that. And on the outgoing, I need him to start his move down. So the edit is not good. You can play around with this for ages and it will never be good. All we can do is distract. The other thing we haven't quite done yet is distract with sound. I've got the sound of a striking clock here. Now if we put that across the join as well, see what happens. For this I'm going to have to add 2 new audio tracks. So on this software it's Control U and Control U. Make them locked. Now if I start the clock striking before they sit down, let's say about here, mark the strike, so it just goes there. We only want this on 5 and 6, so I can hit replace. There it goes. Let's have a listen.
Silver or Duraclit.
It's a funny thing about...
We need it a tiny bit later. Try this.
Silver or Duraclit.
It's a funny thing about funerals. The deceased have no...
And for neatness we can extend the ticking back. So here's the whole edit, now with the clock added.
I ought to have shares in Silver or Duraclit.
It's a funny thing about funerals. The deceased have no influence whatsoever in the events, even though they're the reason for the gathering.
And one more look in full frame to see the true horror of it.
I ought to have shares in Silver or Duraclit.
It's a funny thing about funerals. The deceased have no influence whatsoever in the events, even though they're the reason for the gathering.
Well, that join was by no means pretty, but I think you saw that the fact that once we'd added the chiming clock across the join, it did camouflage the poor continuity on the vision. On the download, you've got all the shots you need, including the sound effects of the clock. Have a go at it and see whether you can find that magic point that does mitigate the fact that Philip doesn't sit. It's a difficult one, this, and you'll never achieve perfection, but this is all about compromise, and once you've reached that stage, yes, sound can help a little bit, heal the wound of the vision. Give it a try.